This is your Chargers linebacker, Dan Henley, and you're tuning in with Chargers Unleashed.
Welcome to another edition of Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner and Dan Wolkenstein here with you from the LAFB Network. Today's show, of course, is being brought to you by Bet Online, Charger Bolt Family, and Rock Solid Sports Memorabilia. If this is your first time tuning into the show, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Dan Wolkenstein, I feel like it's been so long since I've talked to you on here. I almost forgot who the hell the show was brought to you by there for a second. I was like, it's been a minute since I had done that intro, and it feels good to get that one out. But for that split second, I'm like, wait, who the hell are we brought to you by again?
It's been a minute, but we're back. We're dusting off the cobwebs after what? I think it's like 4 days, which feels like an eternity these days.
It doesn't feel like 4 days. It's almost been a week.
Wow. But we're back. Exciting show today. Jake, before we get into our episode with Jeff Miller from the LA Times, one of the best in the industry, has a great pulse on these Los Angeles Chargers. Let's talk about our friends over at Bet Online.
Want to remind everybody that Bet Online remains your number one source for all of your sports betting needs this season. Always the fastest and easiest way to bet on all of your favorite sports. Just head on over to betonline.ag to join and receive your 50% welcome bonus with your first deposit. All you got to do is use that promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, to receive your rewards. Bet Online, where the game starts. Dan, you went right into that, by the way. I feel like you almost like glossed right over the lead as far as, hey, what's today's show about? Dan Wolkenstein working the phones again. Special guest, as Dan just mentioned, Jeff Miller. I believe it's the third time that we've had Jeff Miller on this show. Lots to talk about, with all of the things now settling down for the draft. Obviously, all eyes geared towards mini camp and training camp. Beyond that, getting ready for the 2023 NFL season. This is going to be a fun one. I love talking to Jeff. Always brings great insight to the show. And I'm excited to get his perspective on everything post-draft.
Yes, and I think he's right down the middle with our optimism and pessimism. If you split it right down the middle, I think Jeff leans both ways. Sometimes folks would think, oh my gosh, why is he being so pessimistic? Other times folks say, wow, why can't he actually be pessimistic for once? So he kind of leads into both of ours personalities as well as the listeners and viewers on the show. So can't wait. If you have not already gone and checked out LA Times Jeff Miller's stuff, please go ahead and do so. Great friend of the show, as well as a content creator for the Los Angeles Chargers, covering the Los Angeles Chargers for the LA Times. Jake, without further ado, let's get into our episode with Jeff Miller from the Los Angeles Times, coming up next on Chargers Unleashed. We are very grateful to have one of the friends of the show's multi-visitor friend of the show, Mr. Jeff Miller from the LA Times, is kind enough to join us on Chargers Unleashed to talk a little Chargers football. Jeff, welcome back to the show. How are you, my friend?
I am just fantastic. Last time we talked was before the Jacksonville playoff game. And if you guys remember, I remember telling you at some point this offseason, we're talking about the postseason, the Chargers are going to run. Can this happen? And I said, at some point, they're going to have to be able to run the ball. I didn't know it was only going to be 2 quarters later that they couldn't run, and that cost them the playoff game. But yes, so maybe we'll have a little more luck this time for Charger fans' sake that we won't speak into existence of the team's immediate demise.
I was going to say, we had like Jeff Miller, like the Notre Dame wizard, but all in the wrong ways.
Peak foreshadowing by Jeff Miller.
And not that was any insight.
Yes, but look, you mentioned it then.
I think we all kind of knew that, but yeah.
You mentioned it then. We're still talking about it now. The Chargers couldn't run. They couldn't stop the run. And those were kind of the two things that plagued them all season. And then injuries, obviously, as well. And you saw what happened at that Jacksonville game. Hopefully, we don't see that ever again because all of our eyes were burned in eternity for that. Lots of fun things we want to talk about with you, Jeff, today. Obviously, we're going to talk about NFL draft and how the Chargers did. We'll talk to you about some of the grades you have on this team as a whole. Talk to you about some of the recent articles you've put out, especially about the tight end group. But overall, let's kind of start off with just what is your feel for this Chargers team post Jacksonville? They had kind of a reset mode for a while. It's been some time. You've now kind of gotten back with the team. Folks are still now in the facility. Like, how do you feel the team is, whether it's a morale, like any tidbits you've seen just from talking to players, coaching staff? Like, what's the vibe this year as you get into 2023?
Yeah, I think it's very business-like. It's kind of like what you'd expect from Brandon Staley. I mean, he's pretty even-keeled, and I think everybody is kind of in that same mode. It's interesting, you guys. The Chargers are sort of in this, and a lot of it is their quarterback, but they're in this position where they should be good again. We have this, it seems like every year, which is not a bad thing, but it's like you look at these, everyone's putting out their power rankings now, and they're near the top on most people's. I mean, Peter King's came out, he's got him like 15th, which is about the worst I've seen. But everybody else, the expectations are there for this team. Again, it's the same thing we've had, for so long with this. They have a quarterback. They, goes way back to Phillip Rivers. They've always had a quarterback. They've got high end, talent on the upper end of things. And to me, it's just down to, health and their depth. And that's pretty boring. And we, before we started this, I said, let's not be boring. And then I started being super boring with my first answer. But it's like, that's kind of where it is. That's sort of what it feels like to me is, I think these guys should be good. And, it's going to come down to if they can stay healthy and when they do have injuries behind and how they can kind of keep the boat moving forward.
We talked about this last, and I wanted to ask you this. We talked about this last episode, I believe. And I posed the question to Jake about, like, did they do enough? And you talked about injuries and depth being the issue. They went, 7 deep in the draft and some free agency. Like, do you think they solved the depth issues? Like, have they done enough as it stands?
It doesn't feel like it. I don't know about you guys, but to me, it doesn't feel like it really. I still think they need an edge rusher. I still think they need some defensive line help. We've seen it forever. It seems like with these guys just having a hard time stopping the run, especially when they need to stop the run. And I don't know. I mean, what do you guys think? It doesn't feel like to me. It feels like there's still a few moves to come, and there probably will be, but it's not. I don't know that they're going to be able to get the Morgan Fox, Bryce Callahan, Kyle Van Noy additions. Those three pickups they made after the draft. That all those guys played a lot of snaps. I don't know that that's going to happen again. It still feels a little thin to me, especially if they're going to become guys, and I just don't know. It still feels a little bit thin to me.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand that perspective along the defensive line, especially just because it's one of the biggest weaknesses that the Chargers had defensively. And when you look at that compared to what they had last year in terms of more veteran depth, more in-house guys, we had Tillery, you had Fehoko, whatever perception anybody wants to have about how they felt about those individuals, they were still experienced members with this team. Now, when you start looking at the depth, you have Sebastian Joseph-Day, you have Austin Johnson. Obviously, you brought Morgan Fox back. But now I think a lot of people are excited about the Scott Matlocks. Then you have Gerard Clark as an undrafted free agent. But to your perspective, that's still putting a lot of trust in guys that don't have that much experience. So how are you going to be able to round out that depth? So I could understand that. And since we're talking about depth, I want to transition into the piece that you had written, Jeff, about the whole expectations that everybody had about the Chargers selecting a tight end at some point in this draft. And it didn't end up coming to fruition. And I know that through your quotes through Brandon Staley that you had in that, his justification on that was basically that the way the board fell to them, it did not mesh with what they were looking for in a tight end. And the emphasis has obviously been the Chargers need to have a much better blocker at that position for a number of different reasons. So did you feel that it was justified for the Chargers not just taking a tight end for the sake of taking a tight end, but that they actually had a plan? And then even given the fact of what's currently out there on the tight end market, is it right to say that there might not be somebody coming in and that the Chargers are going to stay pat with the 4 individuals that they have at that tight end market now? Does that sound like that's the route they're going to go?
It kind of feels that way. We've had just the last few days here, we've had some tight ends signed. Some of these guys who were still free agents who some of us had speculated maybe could be on the Chargers' radar. There's still a few out there. They're mostly blocking type guys, older guys. So they're not any great, real sexy names anymore. But you've seen some of these guys now get signed, come off the board. So maybe this may be what they're doing. One thing, this may be what they're going to go into training camp with. Now, having said that, that doesn't mean they still couldn't do something. And there's still some guys out there who they could get and get very reasonably priced, I'm sure, at this point. But the one thing I remember going into the draft telling people was, it's not inconceivable that they wouldn't do anything, because this is the same group they've had all last season. So it's not like somebody left and why we need somebody because now there's nobody here. I mean, this is the same group. So the idea that they would go into the season with this group, it shouldn't seem too ridiculous, because this is the group they had all last season. So, and Kellen Moore, the new offense coordinator, said it, the day when he was made available to us. We put him a little bit on the tight end thing, and he said, well, hey, we're going to adjust to what we've got. It's not like, I think a lot of people were, comparing this year's, coming up Chargers with the Cowboys of the past, where Moore was there and they used a lot of tight ends, and they used a lot of 2 tight ends, and just assume that's what they're going to do. Well, if that's not the best way for this offense to operate. Kellen Moore was pretty clear about, hey, we're going to, we'll adjust it the way it needs to be, which you'd expect a good coordinator, a good coach to do. So I think it was funny, nationally, everybody was basically forecasting and locking them to take a wide receiver, and all of us around the team were talking about tight ends. And I thought, well, we're going to be we're so much smarter than everybody else right here. Well, the Mel Kipers and the other people who are thousands of miles from here, obviously had a better idea than we did, because they did go to a wide receiver. So it was surprising, just because it seemed by the end of the process, everybody around the team had them taking one of those tight ends, and then they didn't take any of them. So I do think, and by the way, I do think it was legit what Staley said. I do think they had interest in some of those guys, and it just, the way the board fell and some of the needs they definitely had, it just didn't work out for them.
About the sexy picks for a sec. Quentin Johnston, first round pick. Darius Davis in the 4th. Chargers fans, pundits, critics, everyone talked about how important and how needed speed was on this Chargers offense to help with explosiveness, yards after the catch, aggressiveness. Those 2 guys, paired with Kellen Moore, added to this offense. Does that do enough? Did they do enough, in your opinion, to answer those calls for speed, aggressiveness, and explosion?
Well, the first thing I would say is I would just advise everyone, don't type Chargers sexy for phone and see what happens. You don't want to do that, because some bad stuff's going to come up.
That's good advice,
seriously,
Jeff.
Folks.
Very good. It's very good advice.
Thank you for going to Jeff's TED Talk.
Yes. The Wednesday tip of the day with Jeff Miller. Love it.
I do think I do think they have added an element of explosiveness. The question is with Quentin Johnston is, can he hang on to the ball? And that was the issue he had at TCU was drops. Now he's an interesting guy in that he's apparently this long strider. Now I say apparently, we haven't seen him up close personally yet on the field. That'll come later this week. He apparently, has these long strides, takes him a little while to get going, to get up to speed, but he also has this element where he's very shifty and very quick with his feet right after he gets the ball, which is after catch stuff, which is the explosiveness, and that's what Tom Telesco, Brandon Staley talked a ton about that when they drafted him, and that's what everybody knows him from at TCU. So I do think they have added that element of explosiveness there. We'll see if it, if that actually comes to be, if he can hang on to the ball and take advantage of his skills. The issue that, as I've heard it with Quentin, is he has a tendency at TCU to look up before he had secured the ball, and the concern there is, if you're doing that playing against Big 12 defenses, you're going to be doing that when Jalen Ramsey's eyeing you up on the other side, and you're in the NFL, you're definitely going to be doing that. So that's going to be something that we're all going to be watching here, especially once training camp comes around. But yeah, I think that, that's the idea. And that was the reason, no question. I mean, that yards after catches, that's why the Chargers drafted this guy. So we'll see about that. Darius Davis, I love that pick. He's one of the fastest guys in the draft, one of the fastest guys in all of football, college, and the pros last year. So that's a great pick. And I love the fact that these guys, they're serious about special teams now. This has changed from when I first started covering this team a few years ago. These guys are into special teams now, and that it's good to see because them go and get a guy who I'm sure a lot of teams had their eyes on for that exact role, and we know the Chargers needed a return guy, and they went and got who might be the best one that was available.
Let me shift it over to another element of the offense there, Jeff, as far as the situation with Austin Eckler. Obviously, it sounds like everybody is optimistic that he will ultimately end up coming back and playing for the Chargers this upcoming season. Obviously, the free agent market has not been that kind to running backs in general. But just in terms of that running back stable, and because of that whole situation, a lot of people were thinking, okay, the Chargers are going to go after Bijan Robinson in the draft. They could target another running back. And much like the tight end position, they did not do that at all. And I'm interested to hear your opinion on this because it sounds like for a couple of years, we've been looking for that, next person to step up in that running back stable behind Austin Eckler, give him a little bit of relief. And you kind of got that a little bit with Joshua Kelly at times. And there was just a multitude of guys that just weren't able to fill that number 2 role. But one guy that we did not hear a lot of last year, whether it was through, practice performance or just overall playing time, was Isaiah Spiller. So was it more of an indictment on what the team feels about him heading into his second year as to why they did not bother to address a running back in this upcoming draft?
Yeah, I think by not getting a running back, you would think on the surface that would indicate that they have they have faith in those guys behind Austin, and certainly they have the belief that that Austin isn't going anywhere. So I think that's what that I would take from the fact that they didn't draft a running back. The thing about Isaiah Spiller is, he's super young, 20 years old when they drafted him. So I think that they have a lot of belief in him. I asked after the draft a couple of people about it, and they both said, hey, he's still the same guy we drafted. We still like him as much as we did a year ago. So maybe they know they have something there more than what we've seen so far, just because we haven't seen them. Basically, after training camp, we're not allowed to watch practices, and that's about the only time he ever did anything, because he just didn't get much game time at all. So I think the takeaway immediately from them not drafting a running back and so far not adding one through free agency is that the two things are the belief in the guys behind Eckler and the fact that they believe that Austin will definitely be here to start the season, start training camp at least.
You've been in the media room for this Chargers team for a while. Lots of beat writers and folks covering the team. Chargers just got done with the draft. Like, what is the overall feeling from the media room, whether it's from folks like yourself or the other folks covering the team or from the team itself? What's the buzz like on this year's draft? Like, how would you kind of encapsulate the overall theme or overall feelings of how they did?
I think it wasn't the big, the last few years it's felt bigger, a bigger deal, the guys they took. This year it felt, and I think it speaks to where the roster is. They didn't really need to go get a starter anywhere. Now, in the past few years, last year, even, Zion Johnson taking turned to be an interior lineman. We knew that was a guy who was probably going to start right away. These guys they just drafted, other than special teams, these guys show up and are expected to be starters at all. So from that aspect of it, it seemed a little underwhelming compared to the last few years when we had a couple of offensive linemen in Zion and Rashawn Slater, who we know how good he can be, and then obviously the year they drafted Justin Herbert. So it was kind of like a little bit of a not to say letdown, but it seemed more pedestrian than in recent drafts. But I think all these guys they drafted, you can see paths for all of them to have some role this season. In some cases, it might not be a big role. In a lot of cases, it won't be a big role. But it's not. There's no real projects here. There's no Trey Pipkins, who it's going to be 3 years before maybe we see this guy, or there's no real just out there kind of I don't want to say reaches, but other than the Max Dugan, the quarterback, we know he's not going to play the 7th round pick. I think they would rather have drafted him than try to sign him in free agency afterward. I think that's pretty much why they drafted him. But other than him, I mean, I think all these guys you could see, having some kind of role on this team, in 2023.
Jeff, you had mentioned at the top of the show as far as just your expectations filling holes, what you felt like the team still needs to address. You said that you still feel like they need to go out and get some edge rushing depth, and whether or not Kyle Van Noy ends up returning, we don't know. Obviously, the Chargers went out and selected Tuli Tuipulotu in the 2nd round with their pick. In terms of just that overall pass rush, the Chargers need to do a better job at getting to the quarterback, and obviously with Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack, your fingers stay crossed that those two can stay healthy and a good tandem for the duration of the season. But does it feel like, especially after last year, with them only going into the season with 3 true edges on the roster between Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack, and Chris Rumph, and obviously you flexed Kyle Van Noy in there in some spots, but where is it as far as what you see? You bring in Tuli, but as far as just that edge group in general, and even maybe just inserting the likes of Derek Ansley in there as defensive coordinator, what does it feel like it's just the edge rusher, or do they just need to do an entirely just better job up front defensively on the line?
Yeah, I think it's the whole group, and I think Morgan Fox, that was an enormous signing to get him back. He provided a lot of pass rush up the middle last year, and that they're thin at edge rusher. I don't care what they say. They've got 2 really good edge rushers, veteran guys we know in Bosa and Mack, but we also know Khalil had stayed healthy all last season, and Joey, we know with Joey, he's had a hard time staying in the field for long stretches, and Tuli. Another thing to keep in mind about him, we talked about Spiller. He's only 20 years old. He's not going to be 21 until September. So that's a man's position out there. I mean, I was thinking the other day that he's going to walk in that locker room and see Khalil Mack walk in with his shirt off, and I don't know what that kid's going to think, because he's like, that's what I'm supposed to look like. So, I mean, Khalil Mack is crazy. That guy, for his size, he has 8-pack of abs. I've never seen anything like it. I don't know how he does it. It's a gift, but it's so. I know they're high on Tuli, but he's a young kid. It's going to take him a little while to get. So it's still, to me, that's what I'm saying. It feels like a thin position to me after the 2, they're 2 big dogs they've got. It does seem like it's thin there. So I think they're counting on. Getting some of that pressure from inside. I mean, Tito Bonia, who was, he was coming on, starting to play really well before he got hurt. Both, he and Austin Johnson are coming off knee injuries. So we'll see how they progress and where they're at once training camp gets here. But it still feels a little thin to me. We'll see. We get to training camp, if it's still this group, I wouldn't be shocked if they're shopping deep into training camp, and as the season, that last week before the season, we could see them bring somebody in who's been released or who becomes available when rosters get cut down.
It seems as though, and we're talking to Jeff Miller from the LA Times, it seems as though the Chargers defensive line in general kind of philosophy is shifting a bit, where they're going for kind of a volume of these kind of hybrid defensive linemen, where you're not necessarily getting a ton of these speed edge rushers, but you're getting the physicality, you're getting kind of the brute strength, brute force type that can kind of fill kind of the strong edge / interior guys at the same time. You look at Morgan Fox, Sebastian Joseph Day, Tito, you've got, the Matlocks of the world. These guys get after it inside. Gerald Clark, EDFA. The defensive line seems like it's changing. One thing that I was going to ask you, we've heard John Johnson's name for feels like 3 years at this point. It's probably been a couple months. Are there legs to that? Is it happening? Do you think it's happening? Is there something that's being hung up? Is it just a money thing? Are they just waiting? What is going on with the John Johnson signing? Or lack thereof?
So at the owners, Yeah, exactly. At the owners' meetings in Arizona, whenever that was, a few weeks back before the draft, I asked about that, and the indication I got was that, yeah, that it was sort of presented to me as that's maybe a long shot, like that's out there, but it's not something that is maybe as prominent on their minds as some of us might think. I mean, it's such a natural connection with his history with Staley, and they need, they could use somebody. It's another position that's thin. They need somebody there. Nas Adderley's gone, and they really haven't replaced him. So that is a spot, and that makes a ton of sense. I think what we're going to probably see here is it could be that maybe Johnston's waiting to see, maybe what else is available now that the draft's over. If anybody else maybe would give him more money, whatever he's looking for. And I don't know that, this was before the draft, so maybe that was going in. Maybe they were thinking they were going to get somebody and they didn't. So maybe it's changed. But I know as of a few weeks ago, at least, it was kind of presented to me as more of an outside thing than a real likelihood. So that's kind of the last time I was able to get someone to really talk much about it. But we'll see until he signs with somebody. It understandably should be a topic here because they do need somebody there, and he's got a history with the head coach. At least from what I understand, it's not dead, but it's not something that, like I said, maybe there is in front of their minds as it is for a lot of us around the team who just seems like such a natural fit.
Jeff, I want to go back to Kellen Moore real quick, just because the last time, obviously, we had you on this Chargers team was led by, Joe Lombardi, much different offense. And there's been a lot of talk and a lot of people that are really interested about what Kellen Moore is going to insert into this offensive group. And you add so much to this personnel. And obviously with Justin Herbert having, not a terrible third year, but as far as what we've seen from him his first 2 years, it was definitely below what people would expected, and he was fighting an injury and still was able to grit through that. And now he's, has his off-season surgery that he's going through. But I wanted just to get your perspective as far as when Kellen Moore has presented to the media his outlook for this offense and what he infuses, and then whatever you could take away from with what he did in Dallas. As far as just what you see, what you heard, how do you think that he's going to mold this into his own? Because we know the control that an offensive coordinator has over this offense. Brandon Staley stays mostly to the defensive side of the ball. But have you gotten a sense as far as maybe just the changes or the differences as far as between how Joe Lombardi may have presented it and then how Kellen Moore is looking to present it for this year?
Yeah, this will be Kellen Moore's deal. I mean, this is, he's got the full reign. He's got the keys to the car, as they say. Staley, I think in his perfect world, just stays out of it completely and lets kind of things will run through him, and he'll have sort of veto power on some stuff. But it's going to be Kellen Moore's show, and I think you saw when he became available, the Chargers pounced, right on him and didn't want him talking to anybody else. They brought him in, interviewed him, and hired him on the spot, basically. So. It's the one thing I would be interested in seeing is, we're assuming right now that that Austin Eckler is going to be on this team, and if that happens, I'm going to be interested to see like how his usage changes. If we've seen, I don't know how much Austin, his receptions the last few seasons have just been the result of the offense that Joe ran, and there was a lot of dumping it off and a lot of shorter stuff. We've talked a lot of people around the team have talked a lot about Justin Herbert and his air yards and all that stuff, how far he's throwing the ball down the field. It'll be very interesting to me once we get into training camp and start to see things, how Austin is used differently, and how as a receiver at least, and maybe some of the different stuff they do that maybe pushes the ball down the field a little more than what we saw with Joe. I think that's going to be the biggest thing. And I think the Quentin Johnston, I think that's how he fits into this whole thing too, is you can get him the ball a lot of different ways and then let him do what he did in college once he's got the thing in his hands and can take off. That's another thing why I think it was so important was, they're trying to, it's this whole idea of explosiveness and pushing it down the field is what Joe didn't didn't do a lot of, and I don't know how much of that was his scheme and how much of it was just the personnel. And certainly some of it was personnel. There's no doubt about that. And so that's why you bring in a Quentin Johnson who's not, they're not expecting this guy to be 1,000-yard receiver as a rookie, I don't think, but they are expecting him to contribute in some very meaningful ways, and he's going to have to, I think, for Kellen Moore to really be able to express the offense in the best way he wants to, and how we really how in Dallas the success they had, and if he wants to try to replicate it here, it's going to require that kind of ability, after a guy has the ball, of doing something with it. So, it's hard to tell so far, just because we haven't seen this offense with these players, but it's definitely it's definitely going to be a very interesting training camp when these guys start to line up and actually play football. How different it looks, I think it's going to be pretty striking right from the beginning.
Jeff, thank you for coming on the show. I know this has been a slurry of technical difficulties that we've pushed through. We've been animals in that regard. I love the resiliency of this team.
Well, when you're dealing with me, you have to be resilient. That's the one thing. You just you have to stick with it with me, because boy, it is a crapshoot. I can relate to Quentin Johnson's having trouble hanging on to the ball, because let's face it, I don't have the best hands in the game anymore. I drop a lot of things over here on this side. So I appreciate you guys having the stick-to-itiveness and the perseverance to put up with my nonsense.
Yes, as the kiddos say, you are #worth it for us and Chargers fans. Look, it's funny you mentioned kind of the offense and how it changes. I think, people talk, say what you will about the Chargers offense under Kellen Moore versus what it was under Lombardi. I think a lot of people, it seems like, and I don't remember where I heard this from, but it seemed like under Lombardi, there was kind of a race to get to the first down, versus with the Kellen Moore, it's a race to get to the end zone. And you're trying to get a first down, and oftentimes that's when your running game doesn't work. Whereas Kellen Moore is like, I don't care if it takes you 1 play, 15 plays, I'd rather take one to get to the end zone. I think that's what I think folks are excited about. But it's going to be fun. We got a lot of things coming up on training camp, got a lot of things coming up when we get to mini camp. Obviously, free agency is still going. We get to see these players get back into the building. I think rookies are starting to come in this week. Jeff, you can find his work at the LA Times. Jeff, what else you got going on? What can folks look forward to seeing from you? Where can folks find you? What are you bringing to them?
Yeah, so we got the rookies this week. Friday, we'll get rookies, and we'll get Staley again, and then we're into the OTAs, I think, after that, or maybe a week later. So all this stuff so far has not actually been OTAs. It's just been off-season program. So the OTAs get a little more footballish. So we should start to see some more. They'll actually line up and look like a football team. It's still kind of phony, but it's still, at least it's a little more than them just running sprints back and forth, which is great. I mean, I'm sure people love it. I've seen enough of that probably at this point in my life, but yeah. So we'll be diving into all this stuff more as the off-season program picks up, and then obviously once we get to training camp, it'll be fun to see, because I think rightfully so, there are a lot of expectations with this team, and there should be, especially, when you have a quarterback like Herbert, your offense is going to be pretty good no matter what, let's be honest. I think people should be fired up about this team.
Well, thankfully, we'll have Jeff Miller on the sidelines not catching passes, because we've seen from Jeff Miller's mouth to ours, look, it wasn't our fault. Jeff Miller is better on the sideline than he is on the field. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us, man. This has been a ton of fun. Can't wait to have you on for 4.0. Can't wait to talk about the Chargers then. But until then, great work. Keep it up, and we'll talk to you soon, all right?
All right, guys. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Anytime.
Thanks, Jeff.
You brought up sexy earlier, that you didn't want to talk about the sexy guys. Now we're going to talk about the sexy guys. We talked about Kellen Moore. We talked about Quentin Johnson now on this team, as well as Darius Davis. Chargers fans, pundits, critics, you name it, everyone's talked about this Chargers team needing to add speed. And they need to inject like this explosion and aggressiveness. Those three guys specifically, Kellen Moore, Quentin Johnston, Darius Davis. How much will that move the needle?
I think we just lost him. Crap. Watch, we'll make a joke about him not paying his bills.
Much like the last episode. Oh, awesome. We should just keep this. Well, Jeff, if you can hear us, I think SDG&E called.
I feel like we gave you the kiss of death on that
one. What? So was that on my end or what happened there?
I think that was on your end.
I think that was on your end. Yeah.
I think that was on
SDG&E, man. SDG&E, they suck.
I think we're gonna keep this whole like 3-minute just in the bloopers reel for later. Chargers fans, critics, pundits, everyone on every network talked about how important speed. How much do those three individuals move the needle? I'm absolutely no. It's gone again. The best part is him just like. I love the. He got the spinning wheel.
I was just telling Dan the next time that we have you on, I literally cannot wait to see what other lights go off, technical difficulties, or other things that are gonna happen. I'm so looking forward to this.
This is the best part is the technical difficulties.
Yes.
It's what I bring to every appearance I make. I bring technical difficulties.
Like
great.
So I've tried something new here. So maybe we'll stay alive here.
Okay, sounds good.
Are we talking about the Chargers? I can't remember. What's the purpose of this call?
Yeah, I blacked out.
What are we doing?
Habit Field. He's balls.
We should just put a still frame of Jeff's picture up, and I'll just do like a voiceover for what I would expect his answer.
What I think he's gonna say.
Yeah,
pull like a pencil drawing of me.
You heard that good.
Why is this happening? You guys have idea?
I have no idea. I don't think the Wi-Fi enjoys it when you talk.
It's like
Jeff,
the connection is not good. Or something
when you're not giving answers, your Wi-Fi connection is great. But when you start giving these nice, elaborate, in-depth answers, it's like, nope. Right now, we're going to pull the plug on you. Enough of that.
Yeah, the thing's got good judgment. Apparently, would be my answer. Observation on that.
I mean, it's working now. Maybe you need to talk really fast before it cuts out.
That's it is.
Back to you.
It's a very professional approach. Okay, sir.
Very.